Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is implementation approach with Agile techniques for Dynamics 365 business applications. My name is Erin, and I will be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you are agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on TechTalk's Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the presentation. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Ajit Kotwal, Principal Solution Architect, and Christopher Lim, Senior Solution Architect. Ajit, over to you to kick us off today.
Thank you, Erin, and welcome everyone to our Tech Talk on implementation approach with Agile techniques. I'm going to run through some of the objectives of this session and also what we're not going to cover today to begin with. So we're going to introduce an overview of the approach along with some Agile techniques that we recommend as part of the approach. Now, this is only going to be an introduction to this approach. I mean, this is a complex topic and we are essentially going to give you an overview within the first hour. And at points during the presentation, there may be areas which probably deserve a bit more discussion. And if you're interested, please give us some feedback either through the form or through the Q&A panel that you'd like to have a deeper dive discussion, and we can do some follow-up Tech Talk sessions on those topics. There are 3 or 4 areas where I'll kind of prompt that to see if there's enough interest, and if there is, we'll do follow-up sessions. As part of this, we're also going to share some learning across the multiple D365 F&O projects that we observe, some things that work, some things that don't work. And we want to start a conversation on a project approach for a cloud and SaaS world. Most of you will be familiar with project approaches from previous implementations, from on-premises implementations. And we want to talk about how we can think about the approach in a cloud world. What it doesn't cover is any prescriptive or detailed definition of all of your methodologies. Many partners and customers have their own favorite methodology. And this Tech Talk is really giving you a sense of how we can look at an approach with Agile techniques, where you can look at your own methodology, your own favorite methodology, and see, can you adopt some of these practices? Is there a way for you to adopt some of the things that may work for you in your next implementation? We're also not going to go through a demonstration of project management tools, rather go through the principles of the approach. So we'll start with a little bit of background, and then we will go stepwise through the high-level solution scope. What does that mean? How should we be thinking about planning? How should we be thinking about sprinting? What do we mean by a conference room pilot? How do we monitor the project as it's running? And how do we adjust rapidly to make sure that the project remains on track? If there is any time left at the end of this session, we will pick up some Q&A as well. But please feel free to ask your questions interactively in the Q&A panel as we go along. So one of the questions is why are we doing this Tech Talk? And one of the reasons is that we see common patterns across multiple projects, and some of these patterns you probably see in other business applications as well. So I won't go through all of them. I'll highlight a couple just because I think they're very relevant to the approach that we're going to talk about next. So it typically, you may hear of project slippage, which is a late discovery in the project. In other words, it all looks green for a majority of the time, and then suddenly there's a big delay towards the end. Another common issue we hear about is, a low or sporadic sort of end user or business engagement, where it looks like there's the core team from the business that's engaged, but you're not getting wider business to engage with the project until it's very late in the day, either at UAT or even beyond. And then many times we actually see technical issues that come up, but underlying them are governance issues. In other words, the roots of the actual problem are not the technical issue being discussed, but the governance issues that lie underneath. And hopefully you'll see us through the approach how we recommend we deal with them to ensure that we reduce the pain of those issues that we saw. A typical conversation that we hear is on the approaches, waterfall versus agile. Most of us have been working in the industry for a while. We're all familiar with where waterfall works well, and the limitations of waterfall. Similarly, with a pure agile approach in a business application delivery, there are some pitfalls with that as well. Typically on a waterfall methodology, you'll see things where, for example, there is too much reliance on design on paper instead of an early validation in the system. Customers typically don't have the experience or the expertise to sensibly review very detailed technical design documents. And if that's part of the methodology, they feel they have to approve it, but they're not quite sure what they're approving. There's a little bit of hesitancy in the meaning of those approvals. And even in a pure waterfall methodology, those phases very rarely fall that cleanly, right? Where analysis finishes cleanly and then you're into design and all design is done before coding or development starts. There's often overlap in those areas, and sometimes those methodologies don't elegantly cope with that overlap. In a pure agile sort of approach, there are sometimes difficulties with applying a pure agile approach to a business application, because for most projects, there is an off-the-shelf product that's already been bought. You're working from within this off-the-shelf product. There may be extensions that you're going to be creating, but again, those extensions are based on a core product, and there are ways in which that extension will work well and ways in which it's not a blue sky development, in other words. Also, with the increasing, SaaS world, the increasingly low-code world, the increasing use of tooling and applications that allow you to produce software without having to do a lot of heavy development work. A significant part of the work that happens on a business application implementation is actually configuration, business process design, data migration, security, integrations. A smaller and smaller proportion of delivery is pure software development. And it's important that we take that into account when we look at what is the right methodology, what is the right balance between the different approaches. So today we're going to talk about something we're calling a conference room pilot-based approach, and put aside your preconceptions on what we mean by conference room pilot. It's a term that's widely used in the industry, and it's used very differently by different people. So we'll go through a definition of what do we mean by conference room pilot in this approach. And really, the whole discussion about waterfall versus agile is not always helpful. It's much better to see what is the underlying process, what is the underlying approach that we're going to use, and is it fit for purpose for your project? Is it fit for purpose for the business in which the project is getting implemented? I'm going to start with the benefits of the conference room pilot-based approach that we see. And I'm not going to go through them in detail, and we will revisit these towards the end of the presentation, where hopefully you'll see that how these benefits could accrue to your project. I'm going to pick out a couple because they're particularly significant to this approach. One of them is that you get a much better definition of the project by using a business process focused definition, you get better business engagement, and you get a much better quality output from the project by having a much better business engagement and having that engagement throughout the project rather than only at the end as part of user acceptance testing. You get a much more reliable delivery of the project. You are able to see if the project is on track throughout the project. You're not waiting for test phases. You're not waiting for milestone events to assess the health of the project. You can get a good idea of where you're headed throughout the project. You'll probably be familiar with the sort of key phases of a project in the terminology that Fast Track uses. It doesn't map directly to whatever methodology you may be using, but I think it's important we talk about this in this very broad term. So we talk about the initiate phase of the project, we talk about the implement phase of the project, the prepare to go live, and then obviously the operate the production system. And by initiate, that includes all of the activities, including all the pre-sales activities leading up to the definition of the project, maybe the definition of the project charter, where you've defined your project goals, you've defined the project scope, you've got a reasonably good idea of what approach you're going to use, you have a higher level view of the design that's going to be part of the delivery, you've got your key strategies defined, and you'll probably have a budget and a high level, at least a milestone level project plan. And all of that culminates in a solution blueprint. And essentially this approach is saying, before you start your sprint cycles, take a breath after your project kickoff, make sure you've got all your pieces together that you need to actually start the sprint and continue the sprint in a way that is reliable, that is continuously sprinting rather than, stopping and starting to address issues. And then within the implement, there may be multiple sprints within that implementation phase. And each sprint is a self-contained cycle of delivery of working software of a portion of the business process that is in scope. Each sprint builds on the work from the previous sprint. It's essentially an iterative delivery, an incremental delivery as well of the business process. We're also talking this about how that helps you in the prepare to go live phase, where you've got a much better prepared project for doing your final mock cutovers, for actually doing your end-to-end user acceptance testing, your training, and so forth. And it also helps you in the operate phase in terms of how you can help with end user support, how it helps with triaging issues, etc. And we'll go through in a bit more detail on each of the topics that I just talked about. So what is the conference room pilot-based approach? So we'll talk about 5 components. First of all, and probably the most significant, is ensuring that you've got end-to-end business process driven view of the solution. In other words, you've actually got it visualized. You've got a visualization of the business processes that are in scope. They are depicted end-to-end, and they go down to the level of detail that is necessary to actually execute the project reliably and efficiently. And we'll talk a little bit more about, what does that mean? To what level do I need to go? Incremental readiness of the business processes is another key component where you are looking to make sure that the business process delivery is incrementally being delivered. So you're not waiting for a big bang of a business process getting delivered. You are incrementally adding to the availability of that business process within the system. Within the planning, we talk about doing the planning as an integrated plan across all of the components of a project delivery. So not just the design, configure, develop, test cycle, but also all of the related technical activities like data migration, like security, like all the non-functional requirements. In other words, the business process delivery is the key part of the delivery, and everything else goes along with it. There are no separate silos that then you hope come together at the end of that development cycle. And lastly, the conference room pilot, and we'll talk about what that means, right? This conference room pilot, sometimes it can be called a show and tell, or a playback, or there's various names for it, but we have a very specific definition for this and what we mean by it. So, and we will go through that specific definition. And again, the conference room pilot is a key component of this approach. So within the approach, we'll talk about the five steps: the high-level solution scope and approach creation, the planning, the sprinting, the validation of the solution by the conference room pilot, and the monitoring and adjusting of the project. So let's start with the high-level solution scope. So as part of creating the initial core solution blueprint, the expectation here is before you start your sprints, make sure you've got a scope that is well defined in terms of business processes. So this is a key part of this approach, that you have the visual view of your business processes end to end, down to maybe a level 2 or level 3 at least, before you get started on your sprint. And by this, I don't mean a long list of like a process description in an Excel spreadsheet. I do mean a visualization. Having an Excel spreadsheet with those labeled, targeted, etc., that's completely okay, but you should also have a visualization of it. Should have a definition of what your approach for the project is going to be. And by approach, I mean more than just the methodology that you're going to use. I also mean the standards you're going to adopt, the approach you're going to take for those things that may not be covered by the methodology directly. So if if change management is not part of your implementation methodology, that is something that you're expecting the customer to bring to this project, then that is covered by the term approach. In other words, you've got an all-rounded view of how the project is going to deliver the solution. You should have a high-level design. And again, these are your initial solution ideas of how this is going to get delivered through Dynamics 365 application. This doesn't mean you know the answer to every single requirement. It doesn't mean you know the design down to the lowest level of detail, but you have some idea of the modules you're going to use. You have some idea of how the delivery of the processes and scope are going to work. You have some idea of the related effort. You have some idea of the gaps that you may need to fill. In other words, you're not walking into this completely blind. You'll have your key strategies available to you, like what is going to be a data migration strategy, what is going to be your test strategy, what is going to be a reporting strategy. And normally all of these things are already there. It's a question of making sure you bring them all together and refine them to the point where you say, yeah, this is now sufficiently ready for us to be able to go start the sprint phase. You should also have a high level, at least a milestone level project plan. And of course, it's likely you're going to have a budget as well. Most projects at the kickoff will have all of these in some degree of preparation. The idea here is that you bring it together and assess your readiness to make sure that before you start your sprints, you're in good shape. And if it means you have to take a little bit of time to get them to that shape before sprinting, it's worth your while because it allows the sprints to flow more freely without having to stop and start again. So let's talk about the planning. And within the planning step, we suggest separating the planning into two parts. So creating the initial macro plan and then creating the more detailed sprint plans. So this we've kind of split up into two sections, like the prerequisites for this and then the steps that you take to actually deliver the macro plan. So within the prerequisites, make sure you've got your end-to-end business processes that have been confirmed with the business. In other words, these end-to-end business processes are clearly well accepted by the business, that this is the scope, this is how we're going to operate within the system. You've got your solution blueprint document there. Doesn't mean it's completely finished. Solution blueprint is the living document. You can, as you go through the sprints, look to refine it, revise it when necessary. But essentially, you've got the boundaries of your scope defined. You've got the overall solution outline in place. You've got your roles, resources, and capacity defined. You know who you're going to have available to you from the project. And that means the availability, not just from the implementation partner resources, but also from the customer resources. You have some idea of the backlog or the effort that you need to deliver the project. And this may be through your assessment of the fits and the gaps. It may be through the assessment of the kind of value stream analysis that you've done. It could be through multiple disciplines, multiple techniques, where you've arrived at at how long the project's going to take and what the budget is. Because you've got that, you should have a good idea of the backlog and the capacity. And of course, you've got some idea of the dependencies between the different tasks. And again, this is at a relatively high level. It doesn't mean that you have everything analyzed down to the minute detail. In terms of the steps, we would recommend start with the end-to-end business processes and then create a storyboard. And by storyboard, we mean start with the sequence of business process you're going to deliver from start to finish. So, for example, if you take a level 0 end-to-end business process like purchase to payment, then you've got that level 0 laid out. You've got maybe one level below broken down into level 1, and then you got one more level down at level 2, say. And you're mapping those out on a board. Start with something simple and say, this is the sequence in which this is going to get delivered. I'm going to start with this process, which is core. This is what 80% of the time we do. And then towards the end, we're going to add on this process, which is infrequent, is important to the business. We still need to deliver it, but it's not as frequent. It builds on top of the core process. So get the core process working before we add on the bells and whistles or the variants that are more complex than the core process. And that storyboard essentially defines a logical sequence of business process delivery. And then you take that storyboard and you chop it up into work packages. And these work packages essentially say, I'm going to be delivering these processes or sub-processes first, then these, and within these sub-processes, it includes some work from maybe 2 or 3 work streams. It could include work from, a supply chain management work stream, could include a little bit of work from the finance work stream. It could include a little bit of work from the operations work stream, right? So these work packages are combined delivery of something meaningful from a process or sub-process perspective. And based on that, you allocate them to sprints. So you say, yes, given the effort involved in delivering these sub-processes, I know I can get this done in the first sprint of, say, 4 weeks. I can get this done in the second sprint. I can get this done in the third sprint. So you're starting to create a macro plan which says, I have a rough idea of how many sprints I know I'm going to take to deliver this. I can do that in the basis of what business process I'm delivering each sprint. You're not trying to do it on the basis of the minute task level things that may be in your, in your DevOps or similar application. You're doing it at a business process level. Clearly prioritizing your core processes because you want to deliver the skeleton first before you start putting the flesh on the process deliveries. Some things to remember and some thoughts on the tooling. Right? So remember that this does require, this project approach requires, and creating the macro plan requires, project management that is expert at doing the scoping and the planning. Yeah? Don't assume because we're going to be talking about agile techniques that there is little need for project managers or project management techniques and expertise. It also needs a high level of expertise from the solution architects, both from the implementation partner that's going to bring the expertise from an application perspective, and from the customer that's going to bring the expertise of how the processes actually work in their business. It also requires excellent collaboration between all parties, so implementation partner, any ISVs that may be involved, the customer, and so on. Right? Because as we go through this, you'll see this is meant to be delivered as a combined team with very little handoff. Right? It's a lot of work getting done in workshops in a collaborative way. It also needs a very strong customer resource commitment, because you're going to need to work with the customer resources all the way from the start of the project, all the way through to the end. And it requires that commitment to make sure that the flow of this approach works well, that you get the right level of input at the right time. In terms of tuning, the strong recommendation is use the tools that are best suited to what you're trying to do. If you're finding the tool is getting in the way of the delivery of working software, ditch it and use something simpler, right? There's no point fighting the tool. You've got enough to do in terms of delivery of the project without fighting the tool. So for storyboards, start with basically getting bits of paper, sticky Post-its or whatever onto a wall as you plan it out within a workshop environment. Once you've got something that looks like it is the right answer, put it into a Visio for distribution and for a more permanent record. Or use a tool similar to Visio. If you have a favorite, drafting software, use that instead. For the macro plan, use something like Microsoft Project or similar. Once you start looking at task assignment and creating the more detailed tasks, think of using something like Azure DevOps or whatever you're familiar with and happy with. If you use Jira, use that. And then for the capacity planning, again, start with something very simple like Excel to do the load balancing at a constrained capacity for the constrained roles. Don't try and map every single individual down to a Microsoft project plan of 5,000 lines and then try to resource level it. That is not what we're recommending here for the creation of the macro plan. Start with relatively high level and get something that gives you a good shape for the project delivery. So here's a kind of real life example from projects that have adopted this approach. Don't worry about what the boxes say. They're not meant to be readable. It just gives you an idea that you start with a very simple storyline. That flow of processes shows the sequence of the processes within that storyboard. And then you can start saying, okay, I'm going to chop up this storyboard into 5 sprints or 6 sprints or whatever you end up being. And you're saying, I'm going to go all the way through first, and then I'm going to add some of the more complex items in the black boxes in sprint 2 or sprint 3 or sprint 4. So it starts to give you a view of how your business process delivery will look like in the sprints. And then your process diagrams or your process flows start to get more details as you go through. Very, very simple abstract example of a kind of a macro plan level where you've got your different sprints, obviously in series, and then you've got your surrounding tasks you need to do. The key thing here is you're trying to derive the critical path, so you know what you need to pay attention to as part of the leadership team of the project. You know where things need attention. You know that those tasks need to happen on time in order to keep to the project timeline. If your methodology is entirely agile and you don't have a project plan, you're doing prioritized backlogs, then again, derive a critical path from that prioritized backlog where you can see what are the critical elements that need to get delivered on time. So once you've got your macro plan, that's not the end of the planning, right? You still need to have a plan that defines the space, how I'm going to get my sprint delivered. So in your macro plan, let's say you've come to the conclusion that you can deliver the solution as a complete solution ready to be ready to be tested in user acceptance testing in, let's say, 5 sprints, 6 sprints. But for each of those sprints, you need to have a detailed plan as to what you're going to deliver in each sprint and how you're going to deliver that. So before you start your sprints, make sure that you've got the following. You've got your level 3 or level 4 business process flows for the processes in scope for that sprint. And the level to which you go will entirely depend on the need for it to go to that level, right? You'd go to a level 4, for example, if it's a particularly complex process, or if it's going to be a highly customized process, or if it's a process that is particularly critical to the operation of this business, and it does require that level of extra detail. Don't go down to that level if it's not going to add value. If you're delivering something that's very standard, it's a standard configuration, it's very well understood within that industry, don't try and draft the process any further down. It doesn't help you. Make sure that the solution design, you've got the target solution design for that sprint before you start the sprint. And that, again, doesn't mean you know the answer to everything, but it means you've got an overview. You know roughly how that's going to get delivered. You've got the constraint capacity defined for that sprint. In other words, you know that for this sprint, my constraint capacity role is going to be the subject matter experts from the business and maybe the functional leads from the partner, for example. So if those are your constrained roles, make sure you've got them well planned out, because they will they'll be the rate limiting factor by which you can drive the solution within that sprint. Make sure you've got a good definition of the backlog, the effort, and the related dependencies. What we recommend is, instead of just doing the plan for the sprint that's coming, do the plan for the next 2 or 3 sprints. Clearly, the next sprint coming will be the most detailed, the most well understood. Have a plan for sprint 2 and sprint 3 as well. And as you finish sprint 1, before you finish sprint 1, you've got a better definition of sprint 2, sprint 3, and sprint 4. In other words, a roll forward sprint plan. You've already got a macro plan for each of these sprints. These sprint plans are much more detailed. And in terms of the steps, you start with the project management office and the solution architects defining the sprint plans at a level of detail that they feel comfortable. Yes, that defines the next few sprints in sufficient detail. I can see that the sequence of processes we're going to deliver makes sense. From a technical perspective, it's got the right dependencies. I'm creating the right objects before I rely on them on the next sprint, and so on. And you add some stretch goals in there, and it's important you add those stretch goals, because in projects things happen, right? You can end up with a process that just gets blocked. You can't make progress on it because of something unforeseen. You then don't want dead time with the project. You want to be able to go to your backlog. There's something that's already groomed. You already know how you're going to be able to deliver that at a high level. You pull it into the sprint. You make sure that the total effort is decrementing in the right way. So you're not building up a big backlog. You're not creating a technical debt. Within the sprint plan, you are planning all the related activities as part of that sprint plan: the data migration activities, any test preparation activities, security activities, etc. So what you're not doing is you're not handing off the data migration planning to a separate technical team that just go off and do their own thing in a silo, right? This is planned simultaneously with those experts in the room. So you do a combined plan where you say, in order for my process to make sense, to validate that at the end of the sprint, I need the following data for it to be, for it to be meaningful. And the data migration team essentially is then feeding the project team the data they require as you go through the project. It's not a big bang at the end where they say, right, we finished with data migration now, right? It's an incremental delivery. So you can do things like, end of sprint validation. You can do training as you go through. You can do validation of the system as you go through. You can feed the interfaces for testing, etc. And then the team and the leads look at this project plan for the sprint and commit to 100%. And they take on the stretch goals and say, if we can, we will also try and meet the stretch goals. We'll try and do more than is committed for this sprint. You then should get a day-by-day delivery map with a very clear critical path, right? That doesn't mean this sprint plan is down to the task level defined, right? You can then break that down into a task level definition within DevOps or whatever tooling you're using to create the task assignment. It means that sprint plan is sufficiently well defined that all of the team are committing to delivery of it. You're not spoon feeding them everything. You've given them the task at a level at which they can commit to doing it. In other words, in that sprint plan, you've got nothing there that says, this is a 60-day effort, because the chances of you being able to estimate something that takes 60 days across 4 people is relatively low, right? You're not going to be that accurate. Whereas if you've got a sprint plan which says, this is going to take me 2 days, this is half a day, this is, a quarter of a day, you're much more likely to be accurate. You're much more likely to identify the right dependencies. You're much more likely to complete the task on time. In terms of the sprint planning, don't assume that you're going to have 100% of any of the resources, right? Always assume you've got somewhere between sort of 75%, 80%. If you're starting on this approach, you don't have a lot of experience of this, start with assuming a lower percentage of availability. And the reason for that is, even in your sprint plan, you're not going to have every single thing that a resource does in a given day in that plan. And what can happen is if you assume 100% capacity, they'll say, well, I couldn't do X because I got called into this meeting. I couldn't do Y because I had to go do this administrative stuff. I couldn't do this because I was asked to do a recruitment interview, right? The idea is that you allow the individuals, 20-25% to do all of the day-to-day stuff that you're not going to plan down to the minutest detail, but you're then still expecting them to deliver on that commitment because they're meant to absorb all the other stuff that happens in the day within that buffer, right? And trust me, that buffer does get used up on most projects. Don't think of it as contingency. It really isn't. That time does get used up. Where you can create contingency, and we'd recommend you do create a contingency, is if you think you can deliver this in 6 sprints, add a sprint number 7, which is empty. It has no committed backlog allocated to it. There's nothing in it. You use that sprint to absorb any things that go wrong during the first 6 sprints. Right? It allows you, therefore, to then honor the dates that follow the completion of the solution. So you can keep your dates for start of user acceptance testing, for user training, for go live, and so on. So you create that buffer. It allows you to absorb those changes, and you don't whiplash the rest of the project. Right? You allow the committed dates to stand because you're absorbing the unknowns within that buffer sprint. I'm repeating myself a little bit, but it's important to say, define your main processes first and then the variations. Get them done in the system, show them, and then start working on the variant. Don't try and create the most complex process right from day one as a big bang, right? The level and quality of feedback you're going to get from getting the business to review the main process is very significant. So when you're starting to build or configure the variations, you're going to be much more likely to be successful than if you try and do the whole thing in one go. Again, within the sprint plan, make sure you've got the right customer commitment for the delivery within the sprint, right? You're going to need a lot of people to collaborate on this delivery at this pace in this way. No snow plowing is allowed, right? So what you can't do is you can't build up technical debt in sprint 1 where you say, I got blocked or I was late on these 5 things. Oh, not to worry, I'll just shove them into sprint 2, right? If you keep doing that, what happens is sprint 2 has another 5 things that couldn't get done. So now you have 10 things that carry into sprint 3 and so on. You end up with snow plowing your technical debt further and further down the chain until you arrive at the last sprint and you have a sprint that is way over committed, right? There is no way you can deliver. And then that ends up in a project delay, and you have to say it towards the end of the solution cycle, rather than managing as you go through, right? That's never a popular thing. terms of tooling, the one I'm going to pick out is, we'd recommend looking at something like a Kanban board for your daily stand-ups and your daily triage. It's a very powerful and visual way of communicating to the team what is happening and for the team to give you feedback on where they stand on the delivery. And I've got an example of one which we'll talk about in a minute. But again, within the sprint plan, you don't have to use MS Project if you don't want to for the sprint plan. If you're using something simpler like Excel or whatever, it's okay, as long as you have something that you can visualize and show people what is it that you're delivering within that sprint. These are the processes, these are the interdependencies, and this is the critical path. What is the approach within the sprint? And this is where it's important, right? That we see projects where they are allegedly using Agile techniques. They've got something that is called a sprint, but essentially the behavior within each sprint is just waterfall by iteration. So the culture doesn't change. And the suggestion and the recommendation here is that you need to have a culture change in terms of how you work within a sprint, right? You're not writing long documents and passing them on for review from one team to another, where they are writing comments on the document, and then there are comments that respond to the comments, and then somebody says, well, I don't like the response to the comment, and another comment follows that on. That is not the behavior here, right? You are only creating documents that are absolutely necessary. The bulk of your delivery needs to happen in more of a workshop type environment, in a collaborative environment where your work packages are getting delivered with a combined team of customer, partner, and the wider business, right? So don't feel that you have to work in silos. In fact, it's the exact opposite, right? Do your daily triages and stand up and focus on the critical path. Right? Your daily stand up is now a business process focused stand up. It's not a task level stand up. So you're saying, where am I at on this business process delivery? What part of the process am I working on? And, what am I, what have I done? What are my obstacles, etc. You can use some of the kind of standard Agile techniques on a daily stand up, but do it from a business process perspective. Continue to map all of this work back to requirements, because you do need to map it back to the list of requirements that you might have, so that you know that you're being honest in terms of delivering to the overall scope and the overall requirements delivery. But the overwhelming focus is on delivery of working software, so that you can meaningfully validate it at the end of the sprint. It's not on documentation. It's not on approvals. It's not on anything else. It's on working software. Everything else takes a secondary priority to delivery of working software. Make sure that you've got within your sprinting that every 2 or 3 sprints, you're actually doing an end-to-end test of whatever you've delivered thus far, right? Because at the end of each sprint, you're doing your testing for what you delivered in that sprint, and you try to do it as end-to-end as possible, but you'll find that within 2 or 3 sprints, there may be gaps appearing in your end-to-end testing. So make sure you do your end-to-end testing every 2 or 3 sprints. And the idea behind that is you're creating the collateral, you're creating the documents and the readiness for end-to-end testing, user acceptance testing, SAT, whatever is in your scope of your testing approach. You're not having a cliff edge where you have to start writing scripts and start testing it. You're doing this as you go along. You're building up your confidence in the delivery of the software as you go along. Again, it's important that you minimize the amount of handovers. So every time you have a document handover, which requires, somebody to go away, review, comment, approve, hand back to you, then somebody else hands it to another team, that is dead time, right? You need to minimize that, so the maximum focus is on a review in the room. So if you need to get a design document reviewed, do it in a workshop environment in the room. Talk it through, right? Don't wait 5 days for it to go around a cycle. Make sure all of that can happen within the sprint. The idea behind the sprinting is that you are literally sprinting. Yeah? You're You're not stop starting, you're not then crawling and then restarting. So the idea is that the solution architects and the PMO are helping you by looking ahead at the next sprint and saying, I can foresee there are 3 business decisions I need to get from the business in order to make sure I know which design direction I need to take. Or I've got 3 things I know I need to go to the technical design board to get approval on because this design needs to get approval through them. Or I need to be able to get the right resources defined for this very specialist task that's coming in the next sprint. Get all of that out of the way so that when the sprint starts in which that decision is needed, it's already done. Day 1 to day end, you are sprinting. You're not stopping, you're not reviewing, you're actually delivering working software. And you're removing obstacles for that delivery ahead of the sprint. It does require the solution architects to be on the top of their game, right? It does require them to know and understand the solution well enough to think ahead. It's not easy, but as you start to do this more often, you get practiced at it. It's a real joy to see delivery that happens on time, delivery that happens smoothly, and you're meeting your targets continuously, right? Validating by the conference room pilot. This is a key step. And I've seen projects sometimes at the end of the sprint, especially if they're a little bit behind, think, oh, maybe I can skip the conference room pilot. I'll catch up with it on the next sprint. Don't do that. The sprint is not complete until you've done the conference room pilot. The conference room pilot is part of the sprint. And the sprint ends when the conference room pilot is done. And what we mean by a conference room pilot is the process of validating the readiness of business processes for production use by an invited business audience. So the idea is that you show the business process first as a logical flow in terms that the business understands. So this is all in business language that they understand. And then you show them that process within the Dynamics application. So you're saying, you remember we said this is the process. Here's where I'm showing you how this works. Here's where I'm showing you how that works. This is being shown from within the software as a working process. It's not always complete. It's not even always bug-free. It's not always even all polished, right? But the idea is that you're getting your invited business audience to say, yeah, you're on the right track. That looks like it will work for us in production use, right? Now, the business is not signing the life away, right? This does not remove the need for user acceptance testing or SAT or whatever other test cycles that you might have. We're actually going through with your hands on the system and validating it. But what it does is it makes sure that what you're delivering is not going to be a surprise for the end users, right? This invited business audience is not the people that are seconded from the business to your project, right? These are not SMEs. The invited business audience is your end users. These are the business owners of a given work stream. These are people that do this process day to day in the business. Right? And the recommendation is that you have this defined and delivered by the business SMEs that are on the project. So this show and tell, this conference room pilot is not being shown by the functional lead from the implementation partner. It is actually being shown in working software by the business SME. And that gives a huge amount of credibility to the business audience when they can see one of their own from within their organization talking to them about how this process will work for them in the system. It also brings the business SMEs much closer to the solution. And trust me, when they know they're going to stand in front of their peers and show them some business process within the system, they will make sure it's going to be working pretty well. The feedback that you get on terms of the quality of the readiness of that process is very high because these business SMEs, A, they know the business process very well. They know how it should work. And B, they're beginning to understand the Dynamics product really well as well. So the quality of their feedback when they practice this before they go and stand in front of their peers is very high. Right? And you get very good feedback from this. The way in which you conduct the conference room pilot is probably deserving of a deeper dive. The other two areas where probably it deserves a deeper dive is how do you do your sprint planning and how do you make sure that you're ready for starting sprint. And if there's enough interest in from the audience, we'll do a follow-up tech talk, devoting some time to those specific areas. But the idea behind this is you've got a prepared script. You know what you've delivered in the sprint. The script says, this is what I'm going to show at the end of my sprint, how it works within the system. It has business data in it that is meaningful to the invited audience. It's got the right flow, the person explaining the processes using their language. It's a process that really engages the business, and you get high quality feedback from the business audience as well. There are some rules as to how you conduct this so you get actionable feedback. If you're asking at the end of the sprint, does this meet your requirements from a production use perspective? If the feedback is, well, no, it needs to be an actionable no, right? Why is it a no? If it's something like, well, I need to think about it, I need to go talk to somebody, I'm not quite sure, that is not actionable feedback for you, right? So essentially it's a yes, it works unless they can give you a clear reason why it's a no. And that forces the invited business audience as well to engage in a different way. You're not doing this just to keep them up to date. You're not doing this as a dog and pony show. This is not a PR exercise. This is a working meeting, right? There is an agenda. You're expecting something from the audience. There's an expectation that a deliverable is going to come out of this conference room pilot. So for a 4-week sprint, you would expect a conference room pilot to be maybe a day and a half. It's quite a commitment, right? But you need that amount of time to go through the processes in sufficient detail. You need to be able to invite the right audience for the right work stream. There's no point inviting 30 people from the broad audience when you're going to be talking about some specialist tax design, right? That's not the right forum for that. You need to be able to make sure that whatever you're talking to your invited business audience about is actually engaging for them and that they can give you good feedback. And we can do a follow-up tech talk on how to do this in the right way. Again, some of the kind of important points, I've talked about some of these already. One of the items we should talk about is focus on the end-to-end, right? Not on specific functions and gaps. So when you do a conference room pilot, you're not showing them some minute part of a function, right? Oh, this is how the pricing engine works when you've got this type of contract with this type of customer. No, you're showing them how an end-to-end sales order works. And within that, you may be showing them some specialist function. But the conference room pilot is very much about showing a business end-to-end process delivery, things that make sense to them from start to finish. If you want to show them a specialist function, there are other forums in which you can do that. Okay, for monitoring and adjusting, again, which is a critical part of this approach, right? Where make sure that on a daily basis, you are monitoring the progress of the project, and on a daily basis, you are adjusting to the signals you're receiving. The daily triage that's happening has some meaningful action that comes out for the PMO and for the team leads to go and say, here are the obstacles ahead. This is what I need to fix before tomorrow. I need to go and get this done before tomorrow. It's at that daily cadence, right? It's at a daily basis that you're adjusting and monitoring. And you need to be agile about this, right? You need to be able to move and adjust to the signals you receive. If you have a very complex hierarchical organization where you raise an issue to your team lead takes it to somebody else then takes it to the project management takes it to the program management, then take it to the board, then it goes to, that's too long. You need to be able to adjust on a daily basis. Clearly, there are going to be some things that may need to go to the steering board, but those should be small enough and not happen often enough for you to block progress on the delivery of the sprint. If something has to go to the steering board, then something has gone wrong, right? These should be exceptional issues. Again, if you need to go to the design board for something, that should not be on the critical path. Things that go to the steering board should not be in the critical path. You should be looking ahead for these things and getting them reviewed and approved before they become a critical part of your project. Think of reporting in visual terms, right? It's very important that when you're reporting progress, etc., that you have some kind of visual clue that the business can get engaged in, that stakeholders can get engaged in. People outside of your project that may not be familiar with the language and the jargon used in an ERP delivery, right? They may not understand what you mean on a specific DevOps task where you've got to do some posting profile configuration. Define it in terms of business flow. Here's a Kanban board example, right? This is from a real project. This is a real thing, right? It's very visual. On the left-hand side, you've got the goals. So this is the backlog expressed in business terms, right? And underneath that, there may be other tasks that are defined, right? And if you look horizontally, those are the tasks that are involved in the delivery of that business goal. And each of those boxes or a post-it note may represent underneath in DevOps 10 subtasks, right? You're not trying to do this at that level. You're trying to say at a level of a sub-process, what is it I've got to deliver? And you've got a to-do list, you've got things that you're actually doing, and then you've got the done list. If you're using the visual element like this during your triage, it's very easy to see where people are stuck. At a business process level, it's easy to pull in the right help. You're not getting dragged down into the lowest level of detail where the team leads and the individuals are more than capable of dealing with that. So an example here I use is, blue represents a particular, business SME. As a team lead, you may look at that and you say, you know what? They've been doing these 4 things for a long time. They're not making good progress. They're not able to work on 4 things simultaneously. I'm going to take away 3 of those. I'm going to put them in the to-do. I'm going to say, finish this one. Then I'll give you the next one. Then I'll give you the next one and the next one. I'll feed you it in sequence so we can get the right level of progress, right? The bottom, you can see the blocked elements. You don't need to debate it for a long time in the daily stand-up. You can just pick that up and the project management and team leads can go resolve that outside. Here's another example of how we would recommend you think about reporting progress, right? So this is a very simple functional decomposition. It's a functional breakdown of, various different work streams. You can do this either as a business process flow, or you can do it as a functional decomposition like that. It's a visual way, which gives you an immediate clue if you're a business stakeholder as to where the project stands. So looking at this, I can easily see, oh, look, I'm blocked on warehouse. I've got 2 blocked things and I've got, 5 things that have been in test for a while. Is there a quality issue? Why is it going through repeated test cycles? I've got 2 things that are delayed. I've got 3 things that are not done, but, they're telling me they're on track. I ought to pay some attention to the warehousing work stream. Whereas if I look at the 2 HR work streams, one of them is working very well. The other one looks like, it's got 3 things that are not on track. It gives you a visual clue very quickly as to what is blocked. When you represent your progress in this way, you're much more likely to get the right level of help from business stakeholders than if you try and present it in a very technical way in terms of, I've got 500 tasks done out of 650, right? This is a very good way of engaging the business to help you. This is the benefits of the CRP-based approach that we talked about right, earlier. And hopefully you can see that as part of this discussion, you should be able to see these benefits if you were to adopt that approach. I'm going to finish with this slide, which is some real feedback from customers after they move to a conference room pilot-based approach, where this is feedback from the end users, right? This is from the business stakeholders saying, we really like the new approach of being able to look at the software and be able to give our feedback on working software rather than having to review design documents and status reports and so on. I'm going to stop here because I'm out of time. I'm going to hand back over to Erin and to Christopher to see if there are any questions we need to answer or whether we're good to finish.
There's one, Ajit, that I'm going to rephrase slightly. Okay. But is this presentation and the Agile techniques only for the ERP and finance and supply chain management, or is this applicable as well for other Dynamics 365 business applications like customer engagement?
That's a really great question, and it's applicable to all Dynamics business applications, including, customer engagement projects. Some of the business processes will differ, of course, for a customer engagement project, but the process, the approach, the way in which you could plan, the way in which you can deliver, they're all the same, right? You still need to take a business process focused approach with a C engagement, because at the end of the day, what are we delivering, right? We're delivering the capability to execute a business process within our business applications. Right? That doesn't change based on the application, just the type of process changes. I hope I answered that question, Christopher.
Yes, thanks.
Anything else that's outstanding that hasn't been answered from the Q&A panel? Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'll hand back to Erin for closing remarks.
Okay, thank you so much. I've posted a link to a short survey in the Q&A panel. We'd like your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. Thank you for your participation. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalk's Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Ajit, and Christopher for answering your questions, and of course to the audience for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you may be.